So he's tossing the dinner, tossing the salad, and she is preparing the fish. And every time they have fish, she cooks it the same way. She chops off the head, she chops off the tail, and throws it in the frying pan. And he looks at her and said, honey, in all the years we've been married, every time we have fish, you cook it this way. Why is that? And she looks at her husband and says, I don't know, that's the way my mom always did it. He said, you know, I've got to get to the bottom of this. So let's call your mom. So they called up old mom-in-law and asked her the same question. Mom, we're having fish. We're cutting off the head. We're cutting off the tail. Why exactly did you do it that way? She went, that's the way my mom taught me to do it. Well, they had the good fortune of being able to call grandma-in-law at the retirement home, and they called her up and posed the same question to her. You know what she said? My frying pan was too small. So my point is, and what I hope to pull out from you today, is that there are a lot of things that we do in our life because that's the way we've always done them. And they may not serve our purpose anymore, and they may not help us, but yet we find ourselves on autopilot. We're living in default to some extent, just doing, because that's the way it's always been done. And I feel especially privileged to be here today with such a group of passionate people who have found a cause, who believe in something strongly. And I appreciate you giving me 20 minutes of your time to talk through this, but I am going to put you to work. Because I want to basically spend time this morning talking about what autopilot looks like and feels like at times, what you can do about it, the problems it creates for us, and how to overcome them and basically live a more fulfilling life. How does that sound? So, how often does this feel like you? You wake up in the morning, smartphone next to your bed, you'll read it first thing in the morning, because it's like a habit at this point, and you constantly feel like you're working against the clock. You got to get the kids off in the morning, you're off to work maybe, you've got commitments all day long. You do, and to some extent it feels like a hamster wheel. And you never quite get it done. And then eventually you go to bed too late for a good night's sleep, and it starts all over in the morning. And yet somehow you're constantly worried in the back of your mind you forgot something important. Like there's one thing, something you forgot that doesn't sit well. So what is that one thing that we forgot to do? What is it that is holding us back, or that wake up in the middle of the night feeling that keeps us sometimes from even falling asleep very well? So what can we do about it? I saw this picture in January and I thought, you know, it's sort of a nice analogy for sometimes of how we go through life, to manage that feeling of I forgot something important and I'm constantly too busy to give it more thought than that. We go through life with this tiny little window on the world where we think this driver thought this was okay to get in his car or her car and drive with this amount of visibility. If you were behind that wheel, what could you see? Straight ahead, right? What can't they see? Everything else. I mean, this person's blind spots are so big, they have no idea what they cannot see, which is why people who saw this took a picture of it and it made the newspaper. But we in our own life don't know that sometimes our blind spots are so big, we can't see. We don't know what we can't see. So the problem with that is that it just leads us through this drudgery. We're just doing because we've always done. We follow the path that we followed the day before. And we forget sometimes just to stop and look around. Look up and see the beauty. And see the purpose in our own lives. Why do we do what we do? And if we do have a moment like this, and I would consider a convention something like this, where you get to basically pause and look around and focus on something that's really, really important to you. But then how often do we take the extra step of climbing up the hill, looking down on the landscape of our lives, and really thinking about the perspective prioritizing what we do, of being a better person of who we want to be to our families, to our community? How can we more powerfully give back? If I could be focused on the right kinds of things. So I want to spend a few minutes, talking to a group of people who care a lot about education. I better put some real live examples in here of people who've done a lot of thinking themselves in this subject. How many of you have heard of Stephen Covey before? So this book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, came out in 1989 and is considered now one of the most influential business books that ever came out. It's a fabulous book. But he talks in this book about time management. And you can see on the vertical grid scale there that he's got non-important activities and important activities, and on the horizontal portion it's urgent and not urgent. And I bet you can relate that a lot of our time every day is spent on urgent activities. Would you agree with that? Feels like stuff is coming at us all the time. People request, people need things, and a lot of the time we spend on important and urgent matters. Crises, problems, fixing things that have to be done today. And then we end up getting stuck working on the non-important but yet urgent things. Sometimes they feel like, the interruptions, how often can you sit around before your phone rings, or interruptions that we cause ourselves, right? That we feel like we have to constantly be involved with things that may not be the best use of our time. They feel like somebody else's priority. So what do we suffer? Well, the problem is if we're spending all this time on urgent activities, it takes a pretty big pull on our energy and our attention and our ability to be effective and think about the longer term things. Because you can see up there in the important but not urgent area is your relationship building. Relationships with your family, relationships with the people in the PTA, relationships with the people in your life, your friends, your family, etc. If you spend all your time dealing with problems and other people's priorities, how do you get the time to really sit down and connect with somebody? How do you ever get the time to stop and plan and think about, what can I do to be even more impactful on the causes that I care most about? The other problem, and this is another great thinker in this area, is a guy named Tony Schwartz, who wrote a book a few years back called The Power of Full Engagement. And he came out with this book a couple years ago, Be Excellent at Anything. And you can see that the quadrants kind of align nicely. That on his vertical axis, you've got energy, and you've got emotion on the horizontal. So, again, if we spend all of this time working on problems, crises, dealing with other people's priorities, we end up in what he calls survival mode. It's the modern fight or flight response. And that leaves us feeling anxious and worried and impatient and frustrated. And it's a very high level because our shoulders are so tight, right? We walk around like this all the time. It's not very healthy. And that we can't maintain that high energy, but we sure can maintain the negative emotion. And that puts us in the negative emotion, low energy burnout phase. And that's not a good place to be either. That's sad. That's depression. That's apathy. And that's when you really feel like all you're doing is staring down and have a small window on the world. That's how we survive. So how do you get to what he calls this performance quadrant, which is high energy, high emotion. What we think about and hear people talk about being in the flow, right? In the zone. When you're working on things that are very important to you, when you are engaged in activities that feel like they're in alignment with your life purpose, when you are challenged and feeling good about where things are headed. And if you want to spend more time there, then you've got to be clear about what you're doing. At the same time, you can also see that he's got a quadrant for low energy but high emotion. And this is the other part, even Stephen Covey talks about, this is what suffers for us, is we don't give ourselves a time to renew. In this go, 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 go world, it's somehow become not okay to take time for yourself, to be thoughtful, to plan, to sit down and look at the values and how well you live out your values in your life. And again, to some extent, I'm talking to a group of people this morning who are incredibly values-driven. You care a lot about children and families and supporting their causes and helping the next generation of people come alive. So my question to you is, could you do that better? Could you be more focused? Could there be something else that you could look at here that would help you, in a form of renewal, get back to performance? The third one, then, is time management. Anybody heard David Allen? He's pretty well known. He's been around for 20 years talking about energy management, time management, and life management. So his grid is a little different. But that survival mode that we just talked about, that fight or flight response, manifests itself in this grid as the victim. Low control over one's life and low perspective over why we do what we do turns into something that we all get to at some point, depending on how overwhelmed we feel, which is, oh, why is this happening to me? They want so much. When will it stop? And a lot of that we own ourselves, just like we talked about, right? Because we get to a point where there's so much input, so much being asked of us that we don't know how to kind of calm the storm. And being in a place with low control and low perspective isn't useful. Neither is, as he points out, high control and low perspective. These are the drill sergeants in life. They know exactly what's going on. They know exactly what to do. However, they don't tell you why. And they're not a lot of fun to be around. Neither are the crazy makers. Crazy makers are people with a lot of perspective. You might think of them as the dreamers. Man, do I have a great idea for you. I know what you could do. But because they don't have a lot of control around how they spend their time, there are these idea factories that never turn into action. Do we know some of those people? So the sweet spot, really, is this master and commander quadrant. A person who's got a lot of perspective, why we do what we do, why I'm focused on the things I'm focused on, why I spend my time doing these activities, and a lot of control. I give myself time to do them. I get things done. So I point all of this out because I want to take a pause for a moment. I want you to pull out a pen and paper, because the key to this is starting to get control over the things that pull on your mind. David Allen talks about the fact that our mind is a leaky bucket. We can actually only remember 3 to 4 things at a time. And you know this to be true, because think about the last time you were in the shower and your shampoo bottle was almost out of shampoo. And you thought to yourself, I better remember to get some shampoo. But by the time you got out, got dressed, got breakfast, you thought about 7 more things. And you totally forgot you needed shampoo until the next morning when you got in the shower. And there's not enough. And so you're putting the bottle under the faucet and trying to get just a little bit, shaking it up, get a little suds, just so you can get enough to wash your hair that morning, right? So if our brains were so smart and could remember all of these things, why didn't we remember to get the shampoo? How many of you, by the way, have a flashlight at home with dead batteries in it? Right? Again, if our brains were these steel traps we make them out to be, why don't you remember to get the batteries when you're at the checkout line at the grocery store? Because our brains aren't really like that. And so you're accessing different parts of your brain when you can take something down and put it on paper. It allows you then to start problem solving and looking at it objectively rather than leaving it in this amorphous committee, which loves its editorialism to tell you how good you've been at something or not, and it never stops. So this is a way to quiet it a little bit. So I want you to take a few minutes of quiet time to simply write down everything that's on your mind, that's pulling on you. The things that you thought about in the car on the way in this morning, the things that kept you awake last night when you couldn't fall asleep, the things that you know you need to do but haven't written down anywhere. I want you just to write fast. You get points for volume. They don't have to be big or things you're going to decide to do, but I want you just to start writing. Go.